Hello, this is Brett Bendistis. Welcome to Bluebooking Crash Course. This is a lecture series that's going to go over some fundamentals when it comes to bluebooking, just to kind of give you a good idea of making the blue book easier. Not easy, but easier, right? We're going to go over some things that I think are worth noting regarding how the blue book is organized, some primary authority points just to kind of give you a good idea of how to cite things, and some secondary authority points to note how to navigate it. Now, the key thing I want to note about this lecture series is that I operate usually from the premise of bluebooking citations, that if you have a plan, blue booking is easy. If you have shortcuts, blue booking will always be hard, right? And so I think a little bit about the way I want to take this is that obviously I can't make blue booking perfect. I mean, obviously there's a little bit of work kind of here and there, but I think that if you put a little bit of effort in to note again, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? How's the organization? I do think it gets easier. I was very recently at the courthouse down on King Street, and I was in the library and I was telling somebody how I do legal methods teaching, and I was with some students and a lawyer, and the lawyer was like, "Oh, you don't need to learn blue booking. Just like use Westlaw, and like here are some cheats that you can do, and it works perfectly." And the second that lawyer left the elevator, I like stopped the students and I was like, "Please, please, please don't do that, right?" Because the idea is that technology changes, right? And the idea that you're going to assume that you can rely on Lexis or Westlaw puts your dependence on doing something that's fundamentally important on a computer instead of you. And that's the key thing. I think that in all things with blue booking, I'd say that it's so fundamentally different from most of the legal work we do, because instead of it being analytical and creating something like out of nothing, this is fundamentally just kind of following directions. And so following directions I think can be hard, but if you have a path of where to go and how to walk through everything, I think it can get, again, easier. So the number one thing I'm going to go over here is that with a few short videos that you should have a good idea of how to make this easier rather than trying for it to be like impossible for the rest of your life. That's the key, because I see a lot of really bad blue book citations, and I like to be step one in stopping graduates from Delaware Law School from being bad at blue book citations. Now, first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this bad boy right here, right? I want you to turn it sideways like a sandwich. If you don't have your blue book, please go get your blue book. That's a good way to start. Or you can have it available for you if you have the online version. It's perfectly fine. It operates in the same premise, right? The key thing on it of the blue book is if you turn it sideways, you're going to see three different colors, right? You're going to see some light blue, and you see white, and you see dark blue. Those three sections are fundamentally different from one another. And how you use the blue book depends on how well you know how those things work, right? So that's the first thing I want to know. We're going to know what are these things and how does this book entirely operate. The first thing I want to note is that you'll see here in these light blue pages, in the top corner, it'll say B and then a number. These are the blue pages. Now, the blue pages operate from the premise, in my opinion, that they are sort of a shortcut for people who are very experienced in doing blue book citations, meaning you need a really quick answer. Not that you're lost, but hey, I just need like a quick refresher on how to cite secondary authority or certain types of like online media, or I need abbreviation in the quickest way possible. That's what this version's for. Now, if you're watching this and you're a student, I'd argue that's not you, respectfully, right? And so I just want to note the fact that if the further you can stay away from the blue pages until you've mastered the other sections, I personally think the better. So while I might reference the blue pages in certain instances, because there are certain types of secondary authority that don't have the walkthrough that I think other things do, we're going to use it a little bit, but we're not going to use it in the way that like this is something that you should be fundamentally relying on in order to make sure your blue book citations work. Okay, now, with that being said, the middle section of the rules, right? These are white pages here. In the top corner, we'll say R and then a number. What the rules are very meticulously detailed ways to cite things. Now, I want you to do me a quick favor real quick. I want you to open your blue book and turn to page IX, which are the table of contents, or just find the table of contents wherever the table of contents are in your book. I'm using the 21st edition. If you have an older edition, it's not like the end of the world, but I wouldn't go much later than 20th if you can avoid it. Again, I learned a lot on the 19th. There's a small difference between the 19th and 20th, less so in the 20th and the 21st, but again, there's differences, and you want to make sure that obviously everything's correct. Now, when you look here in the table of contents, I want to note something. They've organized it by the blue pages and then the rules. So that's good to know. If you turn to page X, 10 in Roman numeral, you'll see Rule 10 in cases. I want you to look at that real quick and note something. You'll see here that you see in the cases section, there's a meticulated version for case names, reporters, court and year, date and year, parentheticals. right? These are really detailed explanations for everything you need to do to note how to cite cases. So the reason why I point that out is, at least in my classes, I can't speak for these other professors here, but I think every answer you need is in the Blue Book. And I feel pretty comfortable feeling like every professor everywhere probably feels the same way, where you don't really have to sort of like make something out of nothing. The answers are here. You just have to know where to look. And again, it's different because I think when you look at like cases, you got to like kind of, again, make something out of nothing, figure out like what does it mean. It's not like it's just the directions. It's just directions, right? And so, although lawyers, I think, are kind of inherently taught to make directions into their own thing, this is something where I just want to note the idea where if you're not sure how to cite cases, if you turn to page 95, there are samples, there are things that you can follow, really meticulous directions. And so, if you want to be good at something, to me, that's where the answer is. Because if I ask you to turn to page 95 in your Blue Book, right? We'll even do it together. One of the big things I want to note about the Blue Book is that the Blue Book is often hard. At least it was hard for me based on laziness, right? I'm a bit of a lazy person from time to time because like when we turned to page 95, that took all of 15 seconds, right? So we turn to it, see the citation forms, we got the things that we need there. I think we're good. Okay, so that's the key thing about the rules. Now I want to note something because we're going to use this a little bit later. If we talk about the rules, you'll see statutes, you see administrative material, you see periodicals, you see books, foreign materials, internet sources. So in all of the table of contents, every source you have where you're not sure about, you can find a pretty good sample right here in the table of contents that give you a good idea of what to do. All right, so Blue Pages, we're never going to use. Rules we're going to use pretty solidly, and I'll point out why in a second. And then lastly, we have something where the dark blue pages right here on the spine. If you turn to the first page of those, which is found on page 227, those are tables. Now, tables are not something you're going to read consecutively. Tables are just abbreviations. There's important points about the Blue Book where you're going to need to abbreviate things really specifically. Again, super easy to find. I would say that if you fold page 227, which starts table T1.1, and then if you also fold over 242, which is table T1.3, those are state abbreviations. Those are the most important, at least for right now. I'm going to give you a few other pages that you can dog ear to make sure that they're taken care of, but the tables are going to give you abbreviations that you can look for. Now, again, I want to tell you something real quick. Turning through the Blue Book, finding those abbreviations takes barely any time. And I also recognize that in a lot of ways, Westlaw and Lexlaw sometimes do some of the abbreviations for you. The key thing I want to note, though, is that if you don't know which abbreviations are there and you don't know which abbreviations aren't, you don't really know how to do this. So I just want to note from now, if you are a student in any context or an early, a young lawyer, turn the pages, open them up, double check. Double checking what the Alabama Supreme Court is abbreviated in takes 25 seconds of your life, but it makes sure that you know that you're right. And I think being right is important in the context of Blue Book citations. So those are the three sections you need. Tables, I think you're going to use for every citation that you use academically. All right. Eventually, you'll get better knowing them. But again, those are the ones you're going to use the most. The rules probably second most. They're sort of a refresher if there's certain fundamental things that you're not sure of, and they're there to resolve problems. The Blue Book, the Blue Pages, I'd say we're never going to use them, right? Very small exceptions. The last thing I want to note is that in the very back, you're going to see an index in the back. Now, again, me as a person, the way I like to do things is I like to find a very ineffective way to do something, and then I do it all the time. My wife loves this about me. It's a characteristic she really, really enjoys, right? And so when I was in law school, I used to just like look in the index, and I found that to be like, in hindsight, I find it to be a very ineffective way to do Blue Book citations. I think that if you're not sure where to find something, the table of contents, knowing what you're looking for, to be able to distinguish primary and secondary authority, what type of secondary authority, what type of citations, just saves you a lot of trouble, right? So again, what we're going to do is we're going to take it slow. We're going to make sure it works. There's a proverb that I love. It says, the slower you take something, the faster you'll go. I do believe that's very applicable when it comes to Blue Book citations, meaning that if you slow down and you do things correctly, right? You have a step by step. That's going to be the key thing with all of these lectures. To me, that's the way to make it work, and that's the way that I've been effective teaching Blue Book citations for 10 years. Now, Key thing I want to talk about right here, right? This is like just some reasons why we cite things as lawyers. And I just want to bring these up because I think when in doubt, you're not sure what to do something. I want you to remember these three rules right here to kind of fill in the blanks of things you're not sure of. Okay, why do we cite things? The first reason we cite something is to show where the source came from. As a lawyer, citations are your friends. Different than most other academic pursuits. I feel like when I used to cite like history papers or psychology or philosophy or scientific papers, you don't want to use other people's ideas. You don't want to use other people's topics. The law is fundamentally different. The law, you want to use other people's things. The concept of precedent is that you're telling the law or the reader that this is in basis of somebody else's thought. This is true. This is correct. These are the statutes. So the idea that you're showing someone where another source came from is so fundamentally important to the law. I don't win cases because a judge thinks I'm persuasive, right? I'm not James Woods in Boston Legal. James Spader, I'm sorry. I'm not going to edit that out. That's fine. I'm only winning because the law commands the answer. And so I just want to note that whether you're writing an academic dissertation, whether you're writing a appellate brief, whether you're writing a closed memo, more citations the better. So every sentence, every rule sentence is cited. So in a lot of ways, when we think about IRAC writing, every sentence in your rule paragraph needs to be cited, needs to be cited. It's the same thing with like case illustrations. If you're talking about what happened in the case, you need to cite it correctly. The other point is to show where the source can be found. I think that in a lot of ways, when we write things, we assume that the reader will do the heavy lifting for us, right? Well, if I cite something and they can find it, that's sort of enough. No. I think you have to operate from the premise that, like, if a judge is reading your writing, they want you to make it as easy as possible for them. So that includes the idea that there are going to be certain sections of these citations that I'm going to tell you, do not edit these, do not change these. These have to be where they are, and you cannot change them at all, right? Important middle sections to note how you can find something on Westlaw or Lexis. Again, cannot stress this enough. The idea that you think a judge is going to read something and be like, well, let me decipher where this case is. It's just going to be disregarded. And at the end of the day, you don't have the trust, I think, as any lawyer, that any judge is just going to believe something that you say without a good way to find it. And I would also argue that if you say something's true and then a judge can't find it, that does reflect poorly on your persuasiveness, which I think is a real problem. So showing where something can be found is important, not only big picture, finding out where it is, in the on Lexis on the library, but I also think pinpoint citations is important. If you're citing a line from a case and you're not taking the time to tell a judge it's on page 25, that's an issue. That's an issue that you have to fix as a lawyer to make sure that they can find it. Because again, I'm going to show later, it's not that complicated to use pinpoint citations. It's not like a 300-page book, just like a case with a line of law. The last thing is to show the precedential value of the previous sentence. We're going to do that in a few different ways. What I mean by precedential value is that I should know the court where something came from. That leads itself to precedential value. I also should know the year, and I should know whether it's primary or secondary authority. Those are things I should be able to see. The key thing I will note is Bluebook citations do a lot of value in saying things that save you time. In a lot of instances, my entire life before coming to law school is about meeting page minimums. It's 8 pages long. How do I get to 8 pages? This was undergraduate Brett. As a lawyer, it's all about page maximums. My brief can't be longer than 6 pages. It can't be longer than 35 pages. It can't be longer than 6,500 words. When you got to save time, having a citation that tells someone the case came from the Delaware Supreme Court saves you the energy of having to write, this came from the Supreme Court. And people look at those. Judges and lawyers read those citations. And so it saves you the time of saying, in Bendistis, the court said blank. All you have to do is say the law is this. And that's a lot more persuasive. It expands the scope of what you're able to do and gives you a better way to present the material. So the last thing I'm going to leave you with is this. In regard to citations, I want to note the idea that there aren't like citations police, right? No one's going to look at your stuff and be like, oh my gosh, you missed a comma, right? But I do tend to think that like citations show that you have an attention to detail, and it shows that you care about the material. A lot of what we do as lawyers is we have to convince people to trust us. That's like such a hard thing to think about and do. How do you get a stranger to trust you? And if that stranger is a judge, if that stranger is a lawyer, if that stranger is a client, to me, I think that Bluebook citations are a way to show the reader that like I'm taking every aspect of this document seriously. right? And I have found instances where if I read something from another lawyer and the citations are not good, I, again, as a lawyer, sort of have a feeling like I can get this person. I know that's like super competitive, but it's true. And so I also think you want to think about that and the idea of like, if you're sending something to a judge with terrible citations, is that judge going to trust you? If you're sending something, as a law student, as like a sample and the citations aren't good, is that person going to want to hire you? And so it's really small, finite details things, but it's the kind of thing that you can't just disregard and assume you can do it later. Okay. So part of this is the priority of making sure that like the work that you have doesn't suffer from an easy thing that you're able to fix. Sound good? Great. Now, I'm going to come back with other lectures here. So if you want to watch lecture 2, that's going to be on primary authority and cases, and then we'll kind of continue from there. If I can go backwards, my contact information is right here. If you have any questions for me, you're more than happy to do so. My YouTube lecture, you probably are seeing it there. I also have a podcast called The Citizens Guide to the Supreme Court that you can check out as well. Thank you very much. And again, hopefully you enjoy the rest of these lectures.